Amateur Traveler, episode 844. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about temples and palaces, gopurams and hill stations, dynasties and dosa, as we go to Tamil Nadu in southern India. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Tamil Nadu. I'd like to welcome to the show Girin Nayak from Exo to Exo Games, who's coming to us from Chennai in the province of Tamil Nadu in India, and has come to talk to us about that region. Girin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me here. I've been listening to this for the last 9 to 10 years, so really honored to be finally speaking to you.
Oh, thanks so much for listening. Girin and I are going to be dealing with something like a 1 to 2 second delay, so if you hear something in the final version where there's odd pauses, we apologize for the internet, but we are not in charge of it. And Girin tells me with the pronunciation of the places in Tamil Nadu, he's going to do the heavy lifting, so we're going to rely on him for all the pronunciation, which I think we can all agree is the better idea. Girin, we're in southern India, southern tip of India. Why should someone go to Tamil Nadu?
So Tamil Nadu is where one of India's ancient civilizations started, and it's also just a bit of statistics. It was the number one state in India for domestic tourists in 2020 and the number 2 state for foreign tourists. So clearly there is something happening here which makes everyone come here. So there is something for everyone. There's heritage, there's culture, architecture, shopping, and great food.
Excellent. And what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Tamil Nadu is a fairly large state. We are going to be looking at mainly 3 areas. The first one is Madurai. It's the 3rd largest city in Tamil Nadu. We'll be spending 2 to 3 days here, depending on how you want to take it. From here, we'll move to another region, which is a cluster of villages called Chettinad. We'll spend 2 to 3 days here. And then from here, we'll move to a place called Tanjavur, which is the site of a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Tamil Nadu. And this is about 2 days. So depending on how relaxed or how hectic you want to make it, this can be anywhere between a 7 to 10 day itinerary.
Excellent. And we did a show before on Chennai, which is way in the northern part. We've now moved to the southern part of Tamil Nadu. So this is an area we didn't cover on that show, and a good companion episode for that episode. So you started us in Madurai. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, Madurai, yeah, correct. Madurai, yeah, just a short note on how you can get into this place. The most conventional way is to come in via Chennai, which is the capital, so it has plenty of international flights and connections. But Madurai also has an international airport, and there is another international airport in a place called Tiruchirappalli, which is about 60 miles from Madurai. And these, both Madurai as well as Trichy, have flights coming in from Dubai as well as Southeast Asia, so Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and so on. So if you're coming from the USA, from around the world, either side, you can come pretty close to where you want to be from here. And I'd also like to say that once you're here for this trip, it would be good to have a car to go around, and a car in which you already have a driver. Please don't try to drive yourself. And if you're in a larger group, it might make sense to maybe have a charter, a van or a bus, so that you can get around to places without trying to get the public transport.
Now, I have, like many people from the U.S. who've been to India, have been in my first trip to northern India. Is the driving similar in southern India? The horn being used quite a lot?
Yeah. See, the thing is, if on the highways, it should not be too much of a problem, because the highways are generally wider and it's fairly easier to drive. In the cities, the problem, especially Madurai, is a very congested city. In fact, driving is more about like just trying to navigate obstacles. So, yes, the horn will be one of your major weapons.
Okay.
So let's start in Madurai. In Madurai, the main attraction, it's a popular pilgrimage center. It's also why a lot of domestic tourists come in. So the main attraction in this city is called the Madurai Meenakshi Temple, It's called it's the Meenakshi is the deity here. It's a goddess, and her consort is Sundareshwar, who is the Lord Shiva of Hinduism. So this is essentially the city got built around this temple. This is a 800-year-old temple. It was built during the reign of the Pandya dynasty. It's one of the ancient dynasties that was there in Tamil Nadu during the ancient period. And it's a really beautiful place with I would say the most impressive part of this temple is it starts right from the entrance. So temples in South India are built a little differently from temples that you might see in North India, especially in terms of construction and how it looks and so on. And the most distinctive feature is the entrance or the gateway to a temple. So this is called a gopuram, and it's typically a long or a tall tapering tower, and this is covered with colorfully painted sculptures and figurines of gods, animals, birds, various things. And for this Madurai Meenakshi temple, there are 4 such gateways, one on each of the 4 directions, so north, south, east, and west. And they are like really impressive. And overall, this temple, including smaller gateways inside the temple, there are 14 such gateways or 14 gopurams. And the aerial view of this, which you can find online, is really quite impressive. It's a large temple complex. So this temple entry is generally allowed for everyone, but in the sanctum, where the innermost part of the temple, which is for religious ceremonies, entry is typically restricted to followers of the Hindu religion. But there is still a lot to see around the temple premises. There's like lots of sculptures. There are smaller temples to side deities all around the temple. There is a large pond. So most temples in South India have a pond attached to it for water. Typically it used to provide water for the villagers, and also it used to provide water for the religious ceremonies inside the temple. And in this particular pond inside this temple, there is a large golden lotus. So it's a floating lotus. So when the tank is full after the rainy season, the lotus floats, and when the tank is dry, it will be settled at the bottom. And there's like a small story here. It's more like a legend about this lotus. So it's supposedly an early day plagiarism detection device. So poets who used to seek favor from the king would come and present their work in front of the Raja of Madurai, and their poem would be placed on top of this lotus. And if it was found to be genuine, then the lotus would continue floating. And if it was not of the required quality, or maybe it was plagiarized, the lotus would sink along with the chances of the poet. So it's a little anecdote from this temple. So walking around the temple is quite a pleasant experience. It's a large, so it will easily take you 30 to 45 minutes. There are guides who will be able to explain the history and all the other stories around the temple. Apart from this, there is adjoining this temple, there is something called a 1,000-pillar hall. So it's a long hall with stone pillars with elaborate carvings. And some of these pillars have musical capabilities, as in you can strike them to listen to musical notes. So this is typically what you can do inside the temple. Now if you step out of the temple, it's also an area where there are several shops. It's like the main shopping district of Madurai. So the shops sell almost everything, literally everything that you would need: clothing, food, utensils, everything. But as a tourist, probably the most interesting thing here is the food. I forgot to mention earlier, Madurai is the street food capital of Tamil Nadu. It's renowned for its food. It's also within Tamil Nadu, it's called the city that does not sleep, because a lot of these street food shops stay open late into the night, and it's possible to have a snack almost at any time that you want. So it's very interesting to go around this temple and sample some of really unique things that you might find only here. So I'll just take you through some of them because we are in the vicinity. Let's just finish this before moving on. There are a lot of beverages that you can have here. Now, if you visit in the summer, it's going to be quite hot. So if you want to cool off, there are two primary beverages you can try. The first one is called Nannari Sarbat. So Nannari is actually sarsaparilla. It's a herb that grows. So they extract this sort of essence of this herb and they make it into sugary syrup. And this is served along with lemon juice and either carbonated water or plain water. You can choose what you want. And this makes like a really refreshing drink. It's supposed to beat the heat and it's light and it's colorful. So you can choose whether you want it in red color or yellow color. So this is one drink that's famous here. Another drink which is also a cold beverage is called Jigar Thanda. Okay, so Thanda means cold in Hindi. Surprisingly, it has reached Tamil Nadu, this word. It's a dessert made of milk. And it uses again the same sarsaparilla essence which was earlier served along with lemon juice, and it has lots of sugar and also a topping of ice cream. So it's like a milkshake. It'll be
It's like a root
flavored
beer float would be what we would have.
Correct, but it's also flavored with say saffron or like certain Indian spices. So it makes for a refreshing drink. You can also come across lots of seasonal fruits which are usually sold along with chili powder and salt. So it makes for a good contrast of sweet and savory or spicy. You can come across tender palm shoots of the coconut palm. So the palm, the innermost part of the palm is sliced and it is eaten. It's edible. It's again served with rock salt or pepper or something. So it's again healthy snack that you can have. And there are also a couple of hot beverages that you can try if you're in the mood for it, or maybe if you come towards maybe the colder times. It's interesting to note that this region, it's away from the sea, so it's a little dry. And typically between say December to January, the evenings can get quite pleasant. It's definitely not cold by American or European standards. You could be at a pleasant say 70, 80 degrees around this, as opposed to summer where you're likely to be above 100 degrees. So a couple of hot beverages you can have. One is a ginger and coriander tea. So it's really to clear your sinuses. It's again a sweet concoction made with a special powder which is ground ginger and coriander. And there is another beverage, again a hot one, called Paradip Pal, which is actually cotton seed milk. So there are some cotton agriculture farms surrounding Madurai. The entire part of the coconut plant is used. So the seeds are typically used to make this warm beverage. So it's another interesting thing to have. Point to note is around the temple, generally you don't have shops or restaurants that serve meat. So they'll mostly be vegetarian.
Sure.
But Madurai is also really known for its meat dishes, which you can find elsewhere. I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
After finishing the temple, we can next move to Tirumala Nayakar Palace. It's actually the remains of a palace. It's not too far from the temple. It's maybe just a mile away. It's a 400-year-old palace, so it's more recent compared to the temple. And it was built by the Nayaka dynasty. No relation to me, but it's more recent than the Pandya kingdom. It used to be a grand place, but it fell into ruin, especially during several conflicts with colonial traders and armies. And it was partially restored by the British, and it is this renovated part that is available for visit right now. It's still a really large place, so there is a really grand entrance, and once you enter there is an absolutely large hall. So this used to be where performances for the king used to take place, dance performances or musical performances. So there are massive pillars that line this entire hall on all four sides, And at the end of this there is a throne room, or a replica of the throne is placed there, and that's where the king used to hold court. So after Tirumala Nayakar Palace, if you're interested in visiting the Gandhi Memorial Museum, you can do so, because one of the 5 memorial museums dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi is in Madurai. So this has pictures and artifacts depicting his life, history, and it has a few letters written by him, and it has some personal effects. So this is another thing that you can do.
Okay. Do you have a particular association with this region? I'm not aware.
Not specifically. He had come to Tamil Nadu for rallies and so on, but this area was chosen, I think, just because they needed one in the south, and it got chosen.
Oh.
Yeah, I would say we cannot, like I said, it's the street food capital of Tamil Nadu. So I would like to spend a couple of minutes describing what else you can have in Madurai in terms of food. Okay. So this is typically South Indian food. So it's distinctly different from Indian food from the northern region, which is your naan, bread and butter chicken sort of things. So in the south, the breakfasts are typically idli, which is like a steamed rice cake, or a dosa, which is a savory crepe. And this is with chutneys, which are made with ground coconut and spices, and with sambar, which is like a lentil gravy. And you might also have what is called a vada, which is a fried savory snack. It's shaped like a donut. It's deep fried, but it's stuffed with spices, onions, chilies, and so on. So breakfasts are typically vegetarian in South India. And if you're going for lunch or dinner, then you'll have the opportunity to partake in some meat. Local specialities in this southern Tamil Nadu generally include biryani. So mutton biryani is very famous here. So there are several styles of biryani available all over India, and every person in India has their own favorite and says this is the best. So this region has its own speciality. They like to make it especially only with tender mutton, and they use pepper as the means of spice in this biryani. So biryani is a rice dish. And another typically very Madurai innovation, I would say. It's really been popularized in Madurai, and now it's spreading to other places in Tamil Nadu. It's called a bun parota. So a parota is, if you are familiar maybe with Singapore or Malay food, they have something called a prata. It's roti made of flour, which is pan fried. So it is essentially the same thing, except it is called parota in Tamil Nadu. So the bun parota is a sort of evolution on the regular paratha, where they specifically shape it to look like a bun. And instead of pan frying it, they deep fry it in oil. So it's far more flavorful because it has more fat in it, but at the same time it also has maybe double the number of calories. So it's good as a treat. It's quite rich. And this bun parota is again served with gravies, usually of meat. So you can have chicken or mutton gravies. They are liberally spiced. So you'll have to decide what you want to have based on your spice tolerance.
And when you say liberally spiced, my understanding is that spices are going to tend to be more liberally used in the south than in the north.
It depends. So the next region we are going to move to also uses spices, but they use it in a different way. The thing is, the southern part of India was where most of the spices were grown. So access was easier, and so it actually filtered more easily into cuisine easier. So most of pepper or all the spices are grown in Kerala, which is a neighboring state. So the spices need the tropics. So so northern India, the use of spice has filtered from South India. So I would put it that way.
Okay.
And just a couple of more interesting food items before we move on to the next place. So you have something called a puttu, Puttu is also, it's a steamed rice cake, but it looks completely different from an idli. Puttu can be made either with rice flour or with millets. So this is steamed in a cylindrical container. So it actually comes out in the form of a long cylinder, and this is served with shaved coconut and jaggery, which is unrefined cane sugar. So it's again semi-sweet and semi-savory dish. It's an interesting snack to have during tea time. So that's
Okay.
all about the food. There is a lot more. You can have an entire episode, but I'll move on to other things.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call it's semi-heure. Parfait. Semi-o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
So we'll move a little slightly away from Madurai. It's not too far away, maybe just about a half an hour drive away. It's an interesting location which actually became famous not too long ago. This is called Keeladi. Okay, Keeladi is the name of a village where just 7 years ago, by accident, they made very large archaeological discovery. So they found some ruins here which show that urban civilization existed in this area about 2500 years ago. So this was a new discovery where it was not known that there was urbanization prevalent in this area that long ago. So this has now become like a popular tour site. You can actually go there if you're interested in this sort of thing. You can go and have a look at the archaeological site. And incidentally, just today they have inaugurated a museum there where all the relics that have been excavated from this site they have displayed, and you can go and have a look at what the history is about this place.
Okay.
Now, I would say the next part of the itinerary is a little optional, but it will take an additional 2 or 3 days if you really want to go with it. But if you want to beat the heat, there is a hill station that is not too far away from Madurai. It's called Kodaikanal. The locals all call it Kodai for short. It's about 75 miles away, but it takes about 3.5 hours because you have to climb a hill, and it's far more pleasant than in the plains. In the winters, the temperature can drop to around 50 degrees. It's a hill station that was developed by the British, so they could not take the summers, so they used to move to the hills. And there are a lot of nice colonial stay options which were like originally cottages used by the British and so on. So in Kodaikanal, generally as you're driving along the hills, you can see lots of waterfalls along the road itself. There's a famous one called Silver Cascade which actually goes past the road where you're driving on. If you choose to be in Kodaikanal, the main attraction here is actually a lake. It's a large man-made lake, and you can go boating on the lake if you like, or you can have a horse ride or a bicycle ride, or you can just walk around the lake. It's about 4 miles all around the lake, so it easily about an hour to go around if you're walking or so on. But swimming is strictly not advised. There are a lot of viewpoints in generally all hill stations in India. They are famous for having viewpoints where you can have look at some sort of mountain which is shaped like one animal or the other, something like an elephant or something. So Kodaikanal's special viewpoint is dolphin nose, so you can go and have a look at a mountain which looks like the nose of a dolphin. And you have locally made chocolates. Chocolate making is an industry that is unique to hill stations in India, so you can go and have a look at some factories allow you to see how it is made. Otherwise, there are several shops where you can just go and sample lots of varieties and so on. Kanal is a nice detour from the heat of Madurai, and it's an optional side tour.
Okay.
I think we can move on from Madurai now. With all that we spoke about, Madurai can take anywhere between 2 to 4 days depending on all that you choose to see. So from Madurai, we will now move to another region called Chettinad. So Chettinad is not a specific town, it's actually a region, it's a group of villages. It used to be settled by a merchant community. So there, it was a very wealthy community who used to trade with Southeast Asia in salt and spices during colonial times. So they made a lot of money, and they came and invested all their money in large mansions in this area. So they built large houses, and these large houses or mansions are actually the main draw in this place. So you can stay in these mansions, and that's like the primary attraction here. It's about 60 miles away from Madurai by road, but it takes about 1.5 to 2 hours. So you can spend 2 days here to see the sights, or if you want to be more relaxed, you can spend 3 days. The biggest difference that you'll find from Madurai here is that it's far less chaotic. So this is mostly a bunch of villages, so it's quieter and less crowded. If you're visiting the Chettinad, I would say you absolutely have to stay in one of these grand mansions.
Okay.
There are several. So typically most of these villages have these mansions, and some of these have been converted into heritage stays or hotels. And you can find some really great ones here.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, personally I like one which is called Vishalam. It's run by actually a very popular hotel chain in South India. Rooms here per night cost about say $85. That's about this thing.
Okay.
But you'll have a room which is so big, it's almost the size of most houses in India. So let me just explain a little bit about why these houses are so grand and why it's nice to stay in them. So these Chettinad mansions are, they are like mini palace is how I would put it. So they generally start with, once you enter the gate, they have a sort of driveway where the cars get parked. And then once you enter the main door, there's usually a grand hall. So this grand hall is where all the ceremonial occasions and hosting of guests used to take place. In fact, they still do. Some of these mansions are still occupied by these families, and they visit once a year to have their family ceremonies and so on. So now these traders used to be like really rich, and so they wanted to also show off their wealth, and so they made sure that all their material that they used in making these houses are like the best possible they could source. So all of these houses, especially the grand hall, they'll have marble flooring from Italy. All the pillars surrounding the hall will also be of Italian marble. They'll get other tiles for the rest of the areas of the house from Japan, steel from Birmingham, and teak. Any wood that is used inside the house would be teak from Burma. So really a globe sourcing of materials to build the house, and it's evident in the quality of materials used because several of those mansions are easily 100 or more years old, and they still look the same as they probably did when they were new. So they are like really well maintained, and that's why it's a great pleasure to stay here also. So all these mansions, they are built in the form of sections. So the first section was the grand hall. You can then step into the next section, which is a courtyard. So the courtyard is where the daily life of the family used to take place, and surrounding the courtyard is where generally the bedrooms and the private quarters of the family used to be. So if you stay in a hotel, your rooms are likely to be in this area because it's surrounding the courtyard, and it's nice to wake up in the morning and have a look. You might be on the first floor, so you can have a look down into the courtyard to see what's happening and so on. So it's an interesting experience. And then the third section is usually where the kitchen or the storage, granary and so on used to be, and the toilets and everything, at least in olden days. Of course, in hotels, you'll find all the amenities in your room, but yeah. So this is the primary thing, but there is also a lot of activities to do.
One picture that caught my eye from the Visalam that you recommended is someone who is sitting on the floor and they're creating a piece of custom artwork for the guest. This looks like it's in a guest room's welcome home, out of salt. So it's a sign and artwork from someone who is basically creating a salt artwork just in someone's room. So this is a level of luxury that I am not familiar with.
Yeah, this place, specifically Chettinad, sees primarily foreign tourists because it's generally expensive by Indian standards. So it's either wealthy Indians or foreign tourists. It's why it's also less crowded and less chaotic. And most of the stays are heritage stays, and so they all have their luxury services and all the works. But also by Western standards, it's not really expensive also. So it's like a great deal to come visit, see a lot of amazing things in one place. So lots of activities. Typically, all of these stays will have a fixed itinerary that you can do. They'll take you around all the villages, see all that I'm about to mention now. That can all be arranged by the hotel where you're staying in. Yeah. So Vishalam, let me just, since you mentioned Vishalam, in terms of architecture, Vishalam is rather unique because the building is actually in an Art Deco style, which is typically not how all the other mansions are made. So all the other mansions look very different from Vishalam. But Vishalam is also one of the best places to stay. So you can visit the other mansions to see how they are and stay in Vishalam is what I would recommend. Right.
All right.
Let's now see what all is there to see in Chettinad. So these are, like I said, it's a collection of villages. All of the villages are about, say, 8 to 10 miles away from each other. So typically half an hour drive away. This is why I again said it's really useful to have a car when you're, or a vehicle at your disposal when you're traveling here. There are about 4 major villages which cover all the sites, and I'll just go through one by one. So the first village we'll look at is Kannadu Katan. So Kannadu Katan is where Vishalam is located. There are also a lot of other stay options in the same place. It's the most centrally located village in Chettinad. So it optimizes your travel time to all the other visits if you stay here. It's also a village that has been preserved as a heritage village. So almost all the entire area that you see here is all Chettinad mansions. So you can visit some of these mansions even if you're not staying there. Some of the older ones, they have a ticketed entry. You can just go and see how it is. You can spend half an hour. There might be a caretaker there who might tell you some stories about how that place came to be. At the same time, there are also mansions which are active, as in like the owners still live there or maybe visit once in a year, and so these may be closed for visits. So they value their privacy.
Okay.
All these Chettinad villages they have a sort of similar construction, as in there will be a temple and a pond, and these are the major sort of center of the village activity. So Kannadu Katan also has a temple and a pond. This village also offers you opportunity to take a bullock driven carriage trip around the village. So it takes about half an hour because the village is really small. So you can sit in a small cart which is driven by a bullock and it will take you around. So it's a nice way to get around and spend some time. There are some weaving centers in this village. Chettinad is also a famous place for textile industry. So there are handlooms here which make all sorts of things. They typically make saris, which is a form of clothing which is worn by Indian women. Mm-hmm. So they are mainly sari weavers. One sari particularly is called a Kandangi sari. It's a famous sari of the region, which is very colorful with a checkered pattern. But they also make other useful things like bath towels and handkerchiefs or shirts and so on. So it's a nice way to support the weavers if you want to make a purchase. And you can see them working their loom and how they make their work as they go about their day. And specifically in Kannadu Katan, I would to say that it's really nice to be here, especially either in the early mornings or in the evenings, to be near the village pond, because there will be a small cart which is selling some snacks and cold drinks. The Nannari Sharbat that we talked about earlier, you can have it here as well. So you can sit under a tree and just see people going around and enjoy the breeze. It's a nice place to relax in the evening. Point to note, while Madurai was the city that does not sleep, these villages being typically rural, they go to sleep very early. So after 5 or 6 p.m., typically after sundown, most tourist activities will cease. Most people who work here will go back to their homes. So you will have to find entertainment, which for sure the hotels provide. There's plenty to do in the hotels, but not much in the way of, say, shopping or dining out specifically after dark here.
Okay.
So the next village or town, I would say this one is slightly bigger. It's called Karaikudi. So this is a slightly more developed part of Chettinad because it has a railway station here and it's got more modern facilities and amenities. I would say here the biggest draw is actually there is an antique market. So they sell old relics from the British era and also from, say, some mansions which fell out of repair or the owners decided to sell stuff off. So you can find lots of rare and precious finds in this antique market here. So it's a good place to go shopping, Karaikudi specifically. And there's also another place where there is a popular stay option. It's called the Bangla. It used to be British. It's not fully a Chettinad heritage mansion. It used to be a British era bungalow, which has been really made up in a nice way, and it's a popular stay location. The next village we will go to is called Thirumayam. So this is to the north of the Chettinad. The main thing to see here is a fort. So Thirumayam Fort. It's a fort from the 17th century. It's a small fort. It's very cute. You can have a look at it in about 30 to 45 minutes tops. And it's very clean and very nicely maintained. It was a fort that was of specific importance during the rebellion against the British. So it used to be a stronghold of the rebels, and but later it got captured by the British, and in fact the British used it as their garrison, and then they used to execute the rebels here and so on. You can go up to the fort, and at the top of the fort there is cannon of British make, which you can have a look at. And the really best thing about this place is actually the view. The land around this area is really flat, so you can actually see for miles, and the weather is typically clear. It's really nice to stand at the top of the fort and have a look all around and see for really tens of miles. So that is the fort. And as you approach the fort as a defensive measure, it used to have concentric rings around it, concentric walls. And as you drive up to the fort, you will be driving between these rings, and you can then go. So most of the rings, they have been ruined, but you can still see some sections of it when you drive up to the fort. Now again in Thirumayam also there is a very heritage stay available. It's called Chidambara Villas. It's again a luxury hotel in the traditional Chettinad mansion style. So it's another popular place to stay. And we'll go to the fourth main village where there is something interesting to see. And this is a village called Athangudi. So Athangudi lies somewhere between Kannadu-Kattan and Karaikudi. So there are two main things to do here. One is you can visit Athangudi Palace, which is again a Chettinad mansion. You can purchase a ticket and have a look around. So if you're staying in a place which is not really a Chettinad mansion and you want to have a look at what it looks like inside, you can visit this village Athangudi and go and look at the palace. So it has all the things that I mentioned about the Italian marble, the Birmingham steel, Burma teak and everything. So it's a grand sort of place. It's not used. Nobody lives here anymore, but it's open for visits and the caretaker will let you in and so on. The other really interesting thing to do in this village is to visit a tile factory. Athangudi is famous for floor tiles, which are used by people who are building houses. So this is a very eco-friendly tile, as in it does not use electricity and it does not use a kiln to fire it like ceramic tiles. So It's made of cement, it is dried in the sun, and it is entirely handmade. So each tile is made by an artisan here. And so these tiles are really unique. They are very colorful and they have geometric shapes on them. What is interesting about these tiles is one tile by itself does not make a pattern. You need to bring 4 of them together because the patterns are only on the corners of the tile. So when you bring 4 corners together, it forms a flower or a circle or a star or something like that. And then when these tiles are laid, multiple ones are laid on a floor, it looks like you have a repeating pattern of flowers or stars or all these sort of things. So you can visit these tile factories. You can see how these tiles are made. They are very colorful to look at. And incidentally, my game, which I made, is inspired by these tiles. So game is called Artisans of Chettinad. So yeah, in this game you are actually laying tiles. I have a special connection with this village because I made a game about it. Yeah, it's one of my favorite places in this place.
Excellent.
Right. Yeah. So I think we have covered all that is there to see in Chettinad. I'll also make a note about Chettinad cuisine before we move on. Again, like I said, Chettinad, the traders were spice merchants. So they really mastered the use of them in their cooking. So while you might find overly spiced food in Madurai, here the usage of spices is very subtle and typically the meat or the vegetable really shines. Again, so most of the hotels will offer you a traditional Chettinad meal. It'll be part of your package or you can pay extra to experience it. In fact, a lot of them also let you see how it is being made. You can visit the kitchen and see how it is being prepared. So all this is part of the experience in these Chettinad mansions. So that's why I said it's like a rounded experience where you get to see some artwork, you get to see cooking, a lot of things you can do. So again, here breakfasts are vegetarian. So it's again idli or those rice based savory dishes. There is a local specialty called paniyaram. It uses the same rice batter, but it's cooked in the shape of small balls in a special pan. If you're familiar with takoyaki in Japan, it looks similar. So except that there's no octopus in this, it's just rice batter. This you can have either sweet or savory. So there are different forms, and so this is somewhat unique here. And for lunch, again, lunch is served on a banana leaf and you are expected to eat with your hand. So the lunch is generally based around rice. Like rice is the main part of the meal, and then there'll be several, easily 15 at least, side dishes of preparations of vegetable and meat. By meat specifically, it's either chicken, mutton, or maybe fish. You are not likely to find pork or beef here. And these are all, they use various combinations of spices, masalas, coconut to make a really grand meal. So it's definitely one of the highlights of visiting this place. And for dinner, the dinners are actually very cosmopolitan. So most of the places, if you want a change, you can have something more familiar. For example, you can order a pizza or like you can have a burger or something in the same traditional mansion. I personally found it very strange that in a very, very heritage setting, I was having fish and chips. So so the tradition stops in the afternoon, and at dinner you have something more conventional or more practical. Like you can have chapatis or maybe even food that's more familiar in North India. Like you can have naan or some butter chicken and all these kind of things. So dinner is cosmopolitan.
Interesting.
So with this, we wrap up Chettinad and we move to the last place on our itinerary, which is called Tanjavur. So Tanjavur is another town. It's about 60 miles away from Chettinad. So again, it takes 1.5 to 2 hours by road. And you can finish this place in about 2 days. So when we spoke about Madurai, it was the seat of the Pandya kingdom. Now Tanjavur was the capital of a rival kingdom called the Cholas. So another very influential kingdom and contemporary with the Pandyas. They were a very strong force and they had a very reputed navy. In fact, they are most famous for having expanded their kingdom to Southeast Asia, like parts of Indonesia and Malaysia they had conquered, which was very rare for someone from the subcontinent to do. They had a very strong naval presence. So the main site to see in Tanjavur is the Brihadishwara temple. So this was built by a Chola king. His name was Raja Raja. Raja Raja means king of kings, and this temple is around this temple is around 1,000 years old. So it's dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. Again, most of this entire area is they are Shiva worshippers. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has one of the tallest temple towers in South India, and this temple is made of granite. So specifically the temple tower of this one is made of, the top of the tower is a single block of granite weighing about say 50 to 60 tons or something. So it's a very impressive temple in the amount of sculptures and carvings that are present all along the temple. And there's a sort of legend that says that the temple tower doesn't cast a shadow, but that's not really true. It casts a shadow, but it's just some folklore that just got passed on through the centuries. So there are various sculptures and murals all along the temple that it's easily you can spend an hour or more at this temple. There are guides to explain all the history and the stories and the anecdotes behind the temple. Like in several other temples, there are also smaller shrines to smaller deities. And there is news that there is going to be a sound and light show in this temple which will happen in the evenings. It's not started yet, but the government is planning for it. But maybe if you are traveling, say after a year or two, it's likely going to be there. Sound and light shows, typically they'll have a sort of storytelling of the history of the temple along with some theatrical light and laser performances using the temple structure itself as a backdrop. So they play with light and shadows on the building itself and generally makes for an interesting thing. It's not there as of now, but they are planning to have it in the future.
Yep.
So this is the Brihadishwara temple. While we are here, I'll also speak about another related temple because it is also part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is called Gangai Konda Cholapuram. So this is another temple which is also dedicated to Shiva. It looks structurally similar to the first temple, but this was built by the son of the first king. He changed his capital. So this temple is about 45 miles away from Tanjavur, and it's slightly more newer and slightly more modern. It's a very beautiful campus. It's been very well maintained. So there's a really beautiful garden all around it. It makes for a very pleasant visit, even if you just want to enjoy the breeze and have a nice look around. This one was specifically built because this king, whose name is Rajendra Chola, so he's the son of Raja Chola who built the first one. He built it to commemorate his conquest of North India. So by conquest, I don't mean the whole of India, but he went much ahead compared to a lot of other kings who had managed to go. So I think he went as far as up as Bengal, which is easily about 1,500 miles away, and he essentially had to defeat all the kingdoms on the way. So it was not a easy achievement. And so once he reached all the way there, he wanted all the kings he had conquered to send tribute to him in the form of water from the river Ganga. So Ganga is one of India's longest and largest and most important rivers. It starts from the Himalayas and it covers almost the entire width of India until it reaches the Bay of Bengal. Having water from the Ganga is considered holy by Hindus. So this king wanted water from the Ganga to be in the well of the temple that he built. And that's why, because he conquered all the way up to the Ganga, it is called Gangai Konda Cholapuram. So word in Tamil means it is the king who conquered the Ganga and he brought the water to Chola. That's how it. Yeah, interesting. Another interesting thing to see in this temple is that there is a large bull made of stone. Since it is a temple to the god Shiva, Shiva's steed is actually a bull. It's called Nandi, and this huge bull greets you. It doesn't greet you. It's actually facing inwards towards the temple, and it's quite impressive to have a look at it. And again, there are lots of amazing sculptures all around the temple, and you can have easily spend more than an hour looking around. And we go back to Tanjavur town now to see what is called the Tanjavur Maratha Palace. This is a palace which is again more recent. It's only about 350 years old, and it's from a different dynasty. So this was called the Marathas. So they built a palace, and it's like a museum, and you can go and have a look around. Quite a lot of things to see inside this palace. It's a large complex. So there is the Darbar Hall, or the place where the ruler used to hold court. There is a sort of mini museum inside where a lot of personal belongings, weapons, clothing and so on, some relics can be seen. So you can see various artifacts from this Maratha kingdom. There is a bell tower. So this is like a large structure which used to house the bell, which used to signal the village against both for announcements as well as for military purposes. So this palace is actually built like a fort. It's a very sort of defensive, because there is an armory also inside it. So it used to house all the weapons and the ammunition and so on. So there is an arsenal tower inside. And it was built to defend against a very quick invasion. So if all the staircases that and passageways that lead inside here are very narrow, they are very short, and they take very sharp right angles. So this is to prevent an incoming army to move in very quickly. And so someone who is at a vantage position will be able to repel an attack easily. So it's a palace that is built like a fort. Interestingly, inside, if you go inside the arsenal tower where the ammunition used to be kept, today you can find a skeleton of a whale. I don't know how it got there, but it is there. Interesting thing to see suddenly in palace. There's also a Saraswati Mahal library. So it's the rulers used to be great patrons of the art. So they had a massive library where it's open and it has ticketed entry, so you can have a look at several old books. And there are also a lot of palm leaf manuscripts from ancient times. Before paper was available, palm leaf used to be the main form of recording literature, and people used to etch on it using a sharp tool, with a metal tool or a nail or something like that. The juice from the palm leaf essentially acts as the ink. So that's how it used to be made. And there's also an art gallery here. So it has a large collection of artwork, probably collected by the kings or commissioned by these kings. This winds up the Maratha palace. So Tanjavur is a 1 or 2 day, I would say, stop. 2 day, I would say, specifically because Gangaikonda Cholapuram is a little away, so it might be more relaxing on 2 different days. Yeah, but it's primarily a temple town, and you can be in and out in a couple of days. And I think that winds up our itinerary of about 7 to 10 days, depending on what you plan to visit.
Excellent. Before we go to our wrap-up questions, anything else that someone needs to know before they go to Tamil Nadu?
In Nadu, the primary language spoken is Tamil. It's different from languages spoken in other parts of the country. But almost all of these places are really tourist. They're really proper tourist destinations. So as long as you are in a tourist environment within hotels or guides, you will be easily able to manage using English. But like I said, some of these places, we really go into some rural areas at some places where, especially like in Chettinad, if you visit some of the artisans and so on, where they may not be able to communicate directly because they may speak only Tamil. But generally, you might have someone accompanying you, like a driver or a tour guide who will be able to make the translation. As such, it's a very tourist friendly place. They are generally very safe places also. In fact, in Madurai, I would say there is safety in the crowd. You can find safety in the chaos. Generally, Tamil Nadu is a very, not too many untoward accidents and so on, so against tourists. So a very nice, pleasant trip you can expect.
Excellent. You know our wrap-up questions here. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Tamil Nadu. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Yeah, I'll pick from what we just spoke about today. So I would say I would be in Kannadu Katan village. So I mentioned there is a temple pond and you are sitting under the tree that is there, a large tree, and you're having a glass of Nannari Sharbat in your hand. And it's evening, there's cool breeze that's blowing, and you can hear the children who are like just back from school and going back home and so on. So you're having a peaceful time.
I feel like you were ready for that question.
Oh, of course, I have answers to all your questions written here.
And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, I would say it's the fish and chips in the Chettinad mansion.
Okay.
And so I would like to add a bit more because it's not the fish and chips you expect when you order fish and chips, because the chips are French fries as you would get anywhere else. But the fish is actually made in a very Indian style or a very Tamil style. So it's deep fried with a lot of masala. It's red in color. And it's typically also an entire fish. It's not a fillet that you generally expect anywhere else in the world when you order fish and chips. But you'll have the entire fish head to tail, but not too big. Yeah, so ordering fish and chips, first of all, in a heritage environment and getting something which you really didn't expect is only in Chettinad, I would say.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize this region in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say heritage, cuisine, and architecture.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Girin Nayak. And Gary, you mentioned having a game. We'll put a link in the show notes to your website. And Girin creates board games, including board games with Indian themes, as you mentioned. So we'll put a link to that. Thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for India and especially for Tamil Nadu.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a real pleasure being here. I've listened to the podcast several times and I never imagined I would be speaking on it one day. So it was a great experience.
Excellent. My thanks go out to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, like Cullen did this week, thanks Cullen, then you can go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. It was an unusual week last week. One of the things that I did last week is I finally put up the trip on the Amateur Traveler Trips group, which is amateurtraveler.com/trips, which leads you to a private Facebook group. I put up the details for both the Japan trip in September of 2023 this year and the Morocco trip for April of 2024 next year. And the Morocco trip is full. It was full within 2 days. I've never seen. The Japan trip still has lots and lots of space on it. In fact, it has so much space that there's some risk that that's not going to happen. I think the last minute nature of that has caught some people by surprise. And of course, it's more expensive than the Morocco trip. I say the Morocco trip is full. Currently, it's sized for 14 people. We're going to try and extend that to 16, which is the max. And we have one person on the waiting list. So there may be one spot left, but it really filled up really quickly. The largest trip we've done so far is 14, so it caught me a little bit by surprise. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be a great trip, and I hope you're one of the people who made it. And I have to say, if you want to go on an Amateur Traveler trip, apparently you've got to be in the group nowadays, because even before I announced it on the show that it was available, it was already pretty much full. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have a question, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.